Special thanks to the K Family Foundation, lead underwriters for Mosaic. Hello, my name is Barbara Kay, and on behalf of the Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County, I'd like to welcome you to our program, Mosaic. Our special guest on Mosaic today is the former United States Ambassador to Israel, Martin Indyk. We'll be back with our guest and our program right after this brief message.
Thanks to your support, Federation maintains the fabric of the Jewish community. By enabling our community to remain vital and vibrant today and for future generations.
Mentoring more than 400 at-risk children through the Youth Futures program in Federation's partnered communities of Israel's Tzachar region.
Providing a wealth of social, welfare, spiritual and educational services available to the 110,000 members of the Jewish community in St. Petersburg, Russia.
We touch so many and do so much. Your dollars fund the work of our Federation. Thank you for your generous support.
Welcome back to Mosaic, and welcome back to you, Mr.
Thank
Ambassador.
you,
what a pleasure. Really is. Listen, I read your book, Innocent Abroad, and it's all about the peace process and a lot of history. I know that we should fast forward and talk about what's happening today in the world, but let's begin with this. I think it's most exciting. In the opening of the book, you talk about the fact that the Yom Kippur War made a tremendous impact on you. Share what kind of an impact and how it directed your life.
Well, I was actually planning to go on Aliyah to Israel. I graduated and gone over there to study Hebrew and then begin a course at the Hebrew University. This was 1973, the summer of 73. And classes were supposed to start after the high holidays. And on Yom Kippur, instead of preparing for classes, we had to prepare for war. And I lived through that Yom Kippur War in Jerusalem and then as a volunteer on a kibbutz down south near Gaza, Kibbutz Alumim. And for me, that whole experience was a life-changing, formative experience in which I learned several important things as a very young person.
Such as?
The first was how precarious Israel's circumstances are. Israel can go from feeling, as it did in the days before the war, that it was the superpower of the Middle East, the strongest country in the region. It could lord it over all of its adversaries, and it didn't need to worry about them. So much so that Anwar Sadat, who had offered to make peace, was spurned. I remember at the time Moshe Dayan saying, it's more important to have Sharm el-Sheikh than to have peace. And then suddenly, as a result of these surprise attacks from Egypt and Syria, Israel goes from being the strongest superpower to this small, embattled, isolated country whose very existence seemed in the first week to be on the line. And that ambivalence, great sense of strength and power and a great sense of insecurity exists even today, where Israel again is very strong, economically, militarily, and suddenly something happens, again in Egypt, with the popular revolution against the Mubarak regime, and Israel suddenly goes into this crouch of feeling isolated, embattled, and weak again. And it's managing that ambivalence that is so much a problem for Israelis psychologically.
Yeah.
Second thing was listening to the planes at night coming into the air base near where the kibbutz was. These C-130s from the US Air Force providing critical material for Israel's war effort, and that supply route in 1973 from the United States, which helped Israel turn the battle first in the north and then in the south against the Egyptians. And the simple reality that while Israel's army was its first line of defense, the United States was its second line of defense, and critically important to Israel's survival. And the third thing that struck me and has been an abiding lesson for me was that as I watched Henry Kissinger, first of all negotiating the ceasefire and then the disengagement agreements, I became to understand that the United States was also critical to Israel's ability to achieve peace with its neighbors, that the United States was the indispensable partner when it came to peacemaking. And so I basically decided to devote my life to understanding the US role in Israel's future and the way in which the United States could affect war and peace decisions in the Middle East.
And then you became the first Jewish ambassador from the United States to Israel.
That's right. I mean, you know, I was an Australian who was going to make Aliyah.
Yeah.
And
it's incredible when you think about it.
That was 1973. In 1993, 20 years later, through a whole lot of serendipitous circumstances, I came to be at Bill Clinton's side when he entered the White House as president, and I was his Middle East advisor, and everything had broken in a particular way that it looked like we could actually achieve comprehensive peace. So having decided to devote my life to this idea that the United States could help Israel achieve peace, suddenly to be
in that position
there at that moment when Yitzhak Rabin had been elected Prime Minister of Israel, the Soviet Union had collapsed, Saddam Hussein had been thrown out of Kuwait, the United States was the dominant actor in the whole region, and all of the Arab states and the Palestinians were sitting in direct negotiations with Israel. And I said to the president, you know, if you put your mind to it, you can have 4 peace treaties in your first term. And he said, I want to do that.
He spent 8 years trying to concretize this. It's amazing, the amount of energy that he put into it. I have a photograph that I've been keeping in my house since 1993 of Arafat, Rabin, and President Clinton. And to me, that was an element of hope because we all hope for peace.
Yeah.
What was interesting in your book, too, you relate to the fact that during the Oslo II time period, they went and they had an evening together. I think that's fascinating, where Rabin and Arafat and from Jordan was there, and Egypt was, everybody, and how Arafat decided that he was partly Jewish. Want to share that? I mean, that was incredible.
Well, Arafat imagined himself to be many things. He lived in his own mythical world. He would tell us that he was the engineer who built the ports in Kuwait, and he was the great religious authority who had prayed with the Jews at the Wailing Wall, but knew that the temple wasn't in Jerusalem, it was in Nablus.
Nablus, that's right.
You know, but so he was an expert on everything, and as I say, lived in this mythical world. He was also, he told me in the last meeting I had with him that he was the Arab world's only undefeated general. He kind of wore this safari suit, it wasn't a uniform, and he had funny little emblems on here that weren't medals because he didn't have an army, but yet he imagined himself the only undefeated Arab general. So the particular instance you're talking about was a moment in which it looked like
everything was
peace was really possible. This was the signing of the Oslo II agreement. This was in 1997, just before Rabin was assassinated. It was really the high point of the peace process. Rabin and Arafat had reached an understanding about how to deal with each other after they'd signed the Oslo II agreements in the White House and gone in front of the press and dignitaries to speak. Arafat and Rabin turned around and left with Clinton, walked down that hallway in the White House with the red carpet, and Arafat put his arm over Rabin's shoulder.
Yeah, you have a photograph of that in the book. It's incredible.
And Rabin left it there. I mean, Rabin was not a man for warm gestures.
No,
but there was a real sense that
something was happening.
Yeah, and then they all came together to give kind of informal speeches at a reception for Jewish Americans and Arab Americans, and the Vice President Al Gore was there, and Bill Clinton and Mubarak and so on. And Arafat got up and gave an impromptu speech, which was very warm and full of talk about peace with his Jewish cousins and so on. And Rabin got up and said, "You know, Mr. Chairman, we Jews are not very good at sports, except for one sport at which we are Olympic champions, and that is speech making." and you, Mr. Chairman, seems to me, Rabin went on, you, Mr. Chairman, seems to me, given the speech that you just made, you must be a little bit Jewish.
So he said he was related to Miriam.
And so then Arafat said, yes, 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 with this big smile on his face. He said, yes. He said, Rachel is my aunt.
Oh. Anyway, I have to tell you, it was...
I have another story, if you'll allow me.
Okay, go ahead.
About Arafat, because I mean, we have a view of him as a mendacious man, which he was, and led his people and Israelis into terrible misery. But there was this other side of him when Barak and Arafat and Clinton were having a summit at Oslo. This was just after Barak had become Prime Minister, and they had all agreed to try in the last year to reach an agreement, Clinton's last year in office. And they came out of this room in the ambassador's residence, and the ambassador was a Jewish big supporter of Clinton's from Detroit, and he had laid on all of these kosher hot dogs that he'd flown in from Detroit with special low cholesterol buns and so on. And everybody stood around, Clinton and Arafat and Barak were eating these hot dogs. And Arafat was kind of off in the corner enjoying himself. And one of David Harmelin's, who was the ambassador at the time, unfortunately, he passed away, but a great Jewish leader. And his daughter was there for this occasion. She had a little video camera. So I asked her whether she'd met the chairman. She said no. So I said, come on, I'll introduce you. She came over with the camera, and she was putting the camera on him, and I introduced her. And I said to him, so Mr. Chairman, how's the hot dog? And he saw the camera, and he held up the hot dog like this, and he said, delicious, delicious, delicious.
Do you think that if Rabin hadn't been assassinated, that something would have happened?
Yes, I do. I think that Rabin had Arafat's number. He understood him. He knew that he was manipulative, but he knew how to deal with him. He knew how to communicate with him. He had a back channel of communication, and they had grown to trust each other. Rabin had put the screws on him. The first blockade of Gaza was imposed by Rabin after the Oslo Accords. But he'd also found a way to help Arafat with his political needs, and Arafat had reciprocated. And I think that basis of trust would have been critically important in terms of making the final deal. But, you know, it's easy to kind of rewrite history. The reality is that taking out Rabin, assassinating him, was a devastating blow from which the peace process really hasn't recovered.
On that note, we'll take a break. We'll be back with the remainder of our program right after this brief message.